Alright, so in the last video we covered looking at chat message history and also memory. In this video what we're going to have a look at is how we can branch out using conditional logic by using something called the runnable branch. As well as that, we will explore a concept called sort of branching and merging. So let's start with the first one. We're just going to do a couple of imports and then we'll have a look at this, which is basically branching with conditional logic. So I've done a really simple example so that you can see how this works. So we've got our runnable branch. You do have to have a generic catch-all case in case none of the conditionals match, right? So if we remove the sort of standard one that would run, you see that basically it has to have one without kind of like a, you can call this like a default, condition, right? If none of the conditions above are checked, right? So in this case, we're checking to see, does X equal hello, or is X a type of string? But if it doesn't equal any of those, when we need a standard kind of default catch-all that will basically stop the runnable branch throwing an error. Now, if I invoke this with hello, what's going to happen is firstly we check to see, does X equal hello? Oh, well it does, and therefore we just return hello, right? You can see that here. Now we also say, okay, if we invoke with none, then we're not going to match any against these cases, and you'll see this then triggers the default case. Now you could use the runnable branch just for doing, different types of outputs, but you could also use the runnable branch if you wanted to run different types of chains based on the outputs from previous chains. So just have a think about how you would like to implement that as well. The next thing we're going to have a look at is something called branching and merging, which is where you want to take an input, do something separately in separate branches of workflow, and then combine those branches into a final result. Let's have a look at an example of this where we have a planner which is saying generate an argument about input. That then gets associated and piped with the chat OpenAI, piped into a string output parser, and then piped into a Python dictionary which takes the output of the string output parser, which is from the runnable pass-through, and then associates that with the base response key in the dictionary. We also have two prompt chains which are separate chains for generating a arguments against and an arguments for. We then have a final responder which says the AI which is using the original response, the human which provides the pros, results 1 and results 2 for the pros and cons, and then has a system message that says generate a final response given the critique, which pipes it into a chat OpenAI and a string output parser. So you can kind of think of the final responder as the one that takes these and that would be the equivalent of the combine step, taking the outputs of branch 1 and branch 2 and combining that. So then it works like this. You have the planner, which then pipes into a dictionary and creates results 1 and results 2 using the arguments for and arguments against chains. We then also add on the original response because remember the final responder chain is also going to need to know about the original response. And therefore it's important that we also grab it from the planner chain so that we can pass that down and get that in the final responder. So then we have a results 1 which gets associated with the pros and a results 2 which gets associated with the cons. We then have the original response, which is the AI's original response, and then that will then allow us to do something like this where we do chain.invoke, input, and then scrum, and then it has a little bit on scrum for the advantages and disadvantages. Now, if you have a look here, it's taken around 35 seconds to generate that content. And the reason for this is we've got a little bit of synchronous API calls happening here where we have the input and we then synchronously wait for both branch 1 and branch 2 to finish before then taking the outputs of branch 1 and branch 2 and doing another LLM API request. So branching and merging, a little bit like sequential chains, can allow you to separate out logic, but it also does come at the cost of increased time. And so, it might not necessarily be the best responses for users that need to get a response very quickly, but it can be very useful for breaking the chain down into more complicated bits to solve more complicated problems. Let's also just reinforce that with having a look at a different example. So we've got this joke, and then we've got a prompt template to tell me a joke. We then get the joke and assign that, and we also get the topic from the runnable pass-through as well. Now, we then get the explain joke, so we ask it to explain the joke. We also say list all the benefits of the joke, and then we've got the final responder, which is, you're responsible for doing a small analysis. The topic will be topic, and getting the joke, the benefits, the explanation of the joke, generate a small analysis of the joke. And then, so what we do is we get the topic, we pass that through as a runnable pass-through, which gets added into the joke chain. From there, then notice how we're also reattaching the joke and the topic keys, because we need those to get passed to the final responder. And this is a common thing when you're doing these sort of sequential chains or branching or merging chains, where you have to remember to get the keys from previous chains so that they can get passed down to the final chains as well. So that's a big lesson that, it can take you a bit of time to figure that out. And also notice how the explanation key and the benefits keys, these two keys are coming from the outputs of prompt chains. And the reason why this works is because we're using this string output parser, which then means that the explanation and the benefits of the joke are actually strings, which can get piped into the chat prompt template for the final responder. So then again, this one's slightly faster at about 15 seconds, 14.8 seconds. And we're doing it on the topic of bears. So it gives us a joke, and it also talks about some of the analysis behind that joke. So this was a brief introduction into conditional branching, and also having a look at how we do merging and branching across multiple prompt chains.